everybody, and welcome to Mini Click at the RTS. I'm Kate Russell. I've been reporting on technology since 1995, a time when the internet was still delivered via your telephone line, and Siri and Alexa were working as answering machine messages on magnetic tape.
To send and receive messages, first sign up for Alexa messaging in your Alexa app.
Stop overplaying your role, dear. Right, in case you don't know us, BBC Click is the flagship technology show for the BBC. We're available every week on iPlayer and on BBC World, and I've heard one of our fans once describe us as the love child of Tomorrow's World and Top Gear. So make of that what you will. We are, of course, always getting our noses in deep with technology. But as a show, we are also constantly innovating on how we connect with our audiences. We were the first show to record and edit our entire show, an entire episode, on mobile devices. We still have some of our editors recovering from that experience. We also were the first show, we brought a full 360-degree VR experience to one of our broadcast shows, and that's actually a technology platform that won awards at IBC for BBC R&D last week. And we've created our own AI. So I'm a bit of a chatterbox, and I do love to have a conversation with my technology. And I've been incredibly excited by the rise of voice interaction, conversational user interface, if you want to be a little bit more technical. Experts now believe that it could be as little as 18 months before around a third of our interactions with technology happen without a screen. And this is completely changing the landscape of our relationship with our audiences and, of course, with the platform distribution centres. So what does it mean to us? What does voice mean to us as broadcasters, as producers, and to our audiences? Well, to start us off, let's have a quick look back at how this technology has evolved over the decades. Well, there you go, from fact to fiction over the last 80 years. That's a flavour of how this technology has evolved. But right now, it's not just on the horizon. It's galloping towards us at a phenomenal speed. Everything from Siri to she who shall not be named just yet, to artificially intelligent televisions. Voice control is here. It's in our living rooms. It's all around us, and everything is listening to us. So what does that mean? Well, over the next 40 minutes, we're going to lift the lid on this cutting-edge technology, looking at speech recognition, voice control, artificial intelligence technology, and it will perhaps help us to redefine how we view our relationship between content creators, broadcasters, and audiences. So I am going to need a little help in order to do that. So, Alexa, open Royal Television Society.
Hello Kate, and good morning everyone. Hope you are all enjoying the Royal Television Society's annual conference. How is everything going, Kate?
Frighteningly well, actually.
That's music to my ears. May I say I think you're doing an absolutely fantastic job. I'm actually a huge fan of yours. But perhaps you would like some friends to join you up here?
Yes, please.
Well, unfortunately Mark Zuckerberg wasn't available. Something about GDPR or something. But luckily our technology expert in residence stepped in. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the BBC's COO of Design and Engineering, Grace Boswood.
Grace Boswood,
well,
everybody.
Unfortunately Mark Zuckerberg wasn't available. Something about GDPR or something. But luckily our technology expert in residence stepped in. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the BBC's COO of Design and Engineering, Grace Boswood.
So good they did it twice.
Grace Boswood, everybody.
Are you ready for your next guest?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together, because I don't have any myself, for the CEO of digital TV platform YouView, Richard Holton.
Richard Holton, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together, because I don't have any myself, for the CEO of digital TV platform YouView, Richard Holton.
Richard Holton, everybody.
Shall we bring on our final guest?
Yes.
And finally, providing us with consumer insight for the past 30 years, please welcome the CEO of market research giant Ipsos Mori, Ben Page.
Ben Page, everybody. Well, there you go. That actually was a proper Alexa skill. We made it using a website called Storyline that allows you to create a conversation, a contextual conversation and exchange. And I think ably demonstrates some of the problems that still exist within the technology. But welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us. This little box here, do we think that this could one day replace our remote controls? What do you think, Richard?
Well, in our house, it sort of already has in almost as sinister a way as it just did this morning. Yes, I mean, I think it could. I think there are capabilities that it gives us which are superior to a normal remote control. You think about trying to tap in the whole title of a program that you're trying to search for, and that's incredibly powerful. And if you look at the way the technology is going, where it's able to recognize individual voices, and solves problems like personalization and who's in the living room, which on a social screen normally has 2 or 3 people in the room. That's a pretty major piece of the puzzle that we've been trying to solve as broadcasters and platforms for years. So I think on a lot of levels, yes, it's got huge amounts to offer the TV experience.
And Ben, you are obviously in the research and statistics business, and you've done a lot of research on these platforms. You know, there's a lot of hype and a lot of talk about how much people are using them. What's your actual experience?
So we track it on a monthly basis in Britain, and it's probably around 8 to 10% of people who say they've got a smart speaker in their house at the moment, and that's gone from 0 in over about the last 18 months to 2 years. So it's clearly taking off. But in terms of how people are currently using them, they're not actually using them to control their TV at the moment. It's mostly tell me what the weather's like, listening to the radio, a little bit of shopping. And I think with all new technologies, it's very, you can never quite be sure what's going to happen. I mean, remember, text messaging was supposed to be used occasionally in emergencies until we discovered that people would much rather not talk to each other than send each other messages. I mean, that's the inventor of it, had no idea how it would be used. With this, I think that there's thousands of skills for that speaker, but only about 3% of people ever actually really install one and keep using it. They install it and then it stops. So some real challenges in getting adoption. And we don't know how it will go, but certainly voice is going to be very important for controlling devices. And the people I think the positive thing on that is the people who've got them, if you compare, they're only a small group of people, but they are far more enthusiastic. So they're still as worried about privacy as everybody else, which is an issue, but they're definitely going to keep going.
Grace, what's your feeling within the BBC about search and discovery and how it's going to change, our interaction with our audiences?
So I think, like the others have said, there's an opportunity and a threat for the BBC here. Obviously, getting our audiences to our content in as expedient way as we can is a real priority for us. And we are investing really, really heavily, not just in experiences that we can deliver through voice formats, and we'll hear a little bit from our R&D department about that later, but also in the capability that allows us to control what we call the intent. So when you say, play something, Alexa, I hope she doesn't, or tell me the news, Alexa, at the moment that intent is owned by Amazon. And they then choose which piece of content they serve back to the audience member. That is a massive risk for us, because whilst we may be the content provider of choice at the moment, and our fantastic distribution and business development department have made sure that we are, there's nothing to say we will be in the future. So we at the BBC really want to control not just the content that people consume through these devices, but also the intent by which we serve that content up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Richard, the search and discovery, obviously you've got a lot of experience going back through broadcast, through the years. Are there any correlations that we can draw to previous iterations of technological advances?
Yeah, I mean, I take Ben's point about we need to be careful about where we are on the adoption curve. But if you were at CES this year and you watched Google spend, I think it was $40 million on display advertising in 1 week on the Strip in Las Vegas, which is more than some of our colleagues we just heard on this stage would dream of spending across a year after a single brand. This is a real fight, and that was all behind the Google's Assistant product. This is a fight between the tech giants, which is probably analogous or could be analogous to the war for the front page of the internet in the late 90s. Who is going to be the browser that you open when you open your screen? But the question is now being posed by companies that own the gateway to your entire home. And if that device had been made by a really good remote control company, of which I'm sure there are many, I'd be less concerned about that. But they're being backed by the two organizations that own search and own retail, or hope to own retail globally. So their ambition is not to make a great remote control. Their ambition is to own search and to own retail. And those are much bigger categories of spend than even the big, aggregations of market caps that we saw earlier. So this is a much, much bigger game than just, getting quickly to last night's EastEnders.
We've already, had a discussion this morning about FANG. It's a deliciously sinister acronym, isn't it? But, content filtering, echo chambers, we hear about all of this at the moment being an increasing problem. How can we protect ourselves as broadcasters, as content creators, from that process of being squeezed out of the mix by somebody who's got a financial interest in you consuming their content, but also owns the platform through which it's delivered?
Not easily is the truth, and I think that it will require us to fight on many fronts. So I think regulation has a really interesting part to play here. The PSPs are regulated in a linear environment through the EPG. Through these environments, they're absolutely not. And how regulation would work in that environment, I don't think we know yet. People in this room may. But I think that that's a very interesting path that we have to go down in order to protect kind of UK culture and UK broadcasting in this space that's so dominated, as Richard said, by the West Coast money. I also think we need to be really alive to their business interests. Perhaps in the days of the early internet, we weren't so conscious of the way this was going. We kind of went onto Twitter, we went onto YouTube as really interesting distribution platforms, and our content creators were very excited about the immediate feedback and what we call the Facebook hit. The Facebook crack is a phrase we use that was given back to them. And therefore, our content build those platforms. We need to be very, very alive to that risk through voice platforms and make sure that doesn't happen to us again, and make sure that we own that distribution environment. Things like UView, Freeview, also really important in that context, because that is our route where it's much more friendly to UK content and friendly to public service broadcasters.
And we've seen this, this echoes some of the technological revolutions that we've seen going back sort of 10 and 20 years ago, haven't it, in terms of YouTube and the rise of streaming content. Yeah,
but I think what's changed there is a recognition by tech and creative businesses that they can partner, and there's a point where they both succeed. So, to give you an example, we're working with Amazon and with Google right now on how we integrate, and that's about Amazon because, as Ben says, they don't see these devices being used to discover TV content, learning about metadata, learning out discovery. It's dairy girls, not dairy girls, all this kind of stuff. And, and equally, they are then happy to export our principles, for example, around prominence. So we said to Google at the weekend at IBC, what's your ambition around promoting your content or your version of the owned content versus a broadcaster's? And they said, well, no, if we plug Google Assistant into UView, because the search results will appear on screen as part of the UView UI, those results will always be determined by UView. So actually, if you have friendly platforms like ours, like Freeviews, frankly like Sky and Virgin, which have great relationships with UK broadcasters, dictating the terms on which prominence is agreed and having that relationship with government, Google and Amazon at the moment are perfectly happy to play by those rules because they trust our television platforms to manage that interaction with the consumer. But that needs, we need to get in there now and have those conversations.
And the other way of looking at this is to say, actually, this is about people's mental availability and how if it's going to be less visual, and it's going in terms of prompts to find things, if search is going to be more voice, then you're going to have to be in their head. The brands are going to have to be there so they know to ask for it. And because in other ways, it gives you all sorts of ways of cutting other people out. If with your massive scope, you're able to just dominate people's mental space for this stuff, then they're not going to even be distracted by anything else because they're just talking into the ether.
And I think you mentioned brands there, and they're incredibly important, having fewer brands that cut through. And we at the BBC are thinking about that a lot in terms of our digital portfolio, that allow audiences to say, right, I'm now in this environment, I'm now comfortable with not just myself, but my children, and playing in this environment. And as somebody with small children in my house, that's an incredibly important factor if I'm going to have one of these in the corner of my room.
And you know, actually, more and more the discussion around brand and brand image. I mean, television's a very visual medium.
Sure.
In the age of voice communications or voice interaction, what does your brand sound like?
Good question.
It's a question that is going to come up, I think, you know, across businesses is going to come up more and more. There have to be some positives though, right? Accessibility, surely. I mean, people will find this perhaps more intuitive once they've learned, or once the conversational interfaces are perhaps a little bit more forgiving about the language that we use. Presumably there are huge pluses for accessibility.
Well, actually, you get audiences, we think, we're seeing signs that once you've got it, you actually start listening to more radio, for example. Because you've just taken the friction out. You don't have to walk across the room and turn on. You just say, you know, Alexa, play me the Today programme. Yeah.
And frictionless interactions is what disrupts every industry now. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about content. And in order to do that, we've had a little bit of the perspective from the business side. But for content makers, there are huge opportunities. And here to reveal what's going on in BBC R&D, please welcome executive producer Nikki Birch. Hello, Nikki. Thank you so much for joining us, taking time away from your busy schedule. Talk to us a little bit about what you've got in the pipeline in terms of content creation.
So we are making our third voice-driven narrative piece. We're just about to release, I think, next month our second one, and we've started working on our third as well. So we've this one was one we released last year, which was a science fiction interactive drama that was on Alexa. But, and then we're releasing one which is called The Unfortunates, which is a collaboration with Radio 3, and that was a Martin Freeman starring play. And then the third piece we're about to start is a more multimodal piece, so looking at using screens as well.
What's the sort of nuances of using this technology? Are there any sort of inherent problems or benefits or different ways of thinking?
At the moment, if we're working on the platforms that exist, so the Google Home and the Alexa, there are lots of limitations. There's lots of restrictions as they are at the moment. It's changing, but at the moment they're very limited, and so you're having to work along the restrictions, which are limited interactions, as you demonstrated. You know, sometimes it's quite difficult for the technology to understand, and you have to work within those confines. And those limitations are quite exciting from a content maker's perspective, because you have to kind of work within the challenges, but also they are restricting, right? So you can't do everything you want. The user can't say anything they want. And you want to have a truly interactive piece of content, and yet the user is limited in what they can say.
Like any skilled performer, I guess, learning the art of knowing when the applause should naturally stop and you should carry on is going to be important.
I thought you did quite a good job there. I was expecting it to break a lot earlier on, so well done.
Well, okay, what would you like to see in the future then? What's the pathway for you?
So I think the pathway really should be content-led. As you mentioned, these devices are being used. They were originally built for sales and commands, and actually they're being used for listening to radio, you know, listening to music. They are being used in a content space, and so we should be, as content makers, be pushing what the technology can do, and that means moving away from just the limitations that the platforms are providing and really being able to open up and working kind of with much more freedom. So I'd like to see that we're exploring kind of interactive content that is much more broad than what kind of Amazon and Google allows.
Yeah, and allows you, presumably, as an audience enjoying it, to direct and interact and actually have some participation. You know, we hear more and more audiences are all about co-creation. They want to be part of the creative process. Presumably, that kind of avenue is opening up for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you can talk to your stars, you know, imagine being able to have conversations with, you know, the celebrities. I want to actually understand a bit more about Brexit. I want to, you know, there's loads of exciting opportunities around what it can do, but the restrictions at the moment, the technologies are, you know, are kind of ensuring those are a bit slower. But we're hoping that, you know, BBC and the R&D are pushing that, and we're really hoping that we can kind of achieve a lot more.
Brilliant. Nikki, we're going to let you go so you can carry on with your good work. Thank you so much, Nikki Birch. So, fascinating stuff. What do our panel think in terms of content creation, avenues, possibilities? Grace?
So, you talked about challenges and opportunities. Maybe the first half was about challenges. That's an absolute opportunity for us. BBC has disrupted itself through new technologies throughout its 100-year history. And we're trying to do the same thing here. So Ben's right. At the moment, people are mostly using these devices to listen to traditional formats. They say play Radio 4, play Spotify, etc. They're brands and things they're familiar with. But the technology does allow you to do different things with audio. We don't know what those are yet, and the inspection chamber is an early example of that. The BBC last week launched a kids skill on Amazon that allows your children to talk to Andy's Adventures, again, a brand I'm very familiar with, others maybe too. So we are testing the waters of that. Usage is low, though, at the moment, as you expect in the early stages of these technologies, but I'm pretty sure there will be some killer format out there that really does disrupt how we produce audio content, and we really hope that teams like ours come up with that.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Ben? I mean, are there any stats about, comfort with age, and how do people feel about that youth experience?
It is still younger people, but you've got to remember that internet penetration is now at 90%, and it's very hard to buy a brick phone anymore. So you've got 80% of people with a smartphone. I think Grace was just saying 60% of people say they've used voice-activated commands with at least a smartphone. And the other thing is, what the data shows is that there's unmet interest amongst people who've already got them in controlling their TV. So 30% of people want to control their TV with that amongst those who've got one. Only about 18% of those who've got one currently have. And that's, whereas on radio, more people end up listening to the radio than think they ever will, which is interesting in terms of it making it frictionlessly available. So there's definitely opportunity there, and particularly with a huge archive, with the amazing legacy of the BBC. How do you find things easily and quickly? The iPlayer is great, but it's still a bit clunky. So if this thing is going to let me very, very rapidly find this art history program I want from way back when, or come up with some suggestions in a clever way using the AI, then it's going to be, I think the potential is huge.
I read an interesting study last week, actually, from it was a car radio manufacturer looking at the interactions, finding the channel that you want to listen to when you're actually driving a car, and the increase in safety. I think it was something like 3 times that users looked 3 times away from the road when they were using voice, as opposed to 12 or 13 times using a touch screen. But this, again, this throws up some interesting questions about data, right? I mean, if you are putting Alexa as a platform into your car radio, who owns the data about what your users are doing, where they're driving, what they're listening to? And could we, Richard, end up with a situation where the platform owners know more about our audiences than we do?
They already do.
Okay.
So
that horse is already bolted.
Yeah, and if you're an ISP, they're using your network for free, over which they know more data about your customer than you do. I mean, it's so. But I think the question that you have to ask at the start of these engagements, partnerships, to get the value of working with companies like Amazon and Google, who are, let's not forget, innovating at extraordinary speed, and therefore kind of hanging onto the coattails is powerful. It has to start with data. And, from our point of view, we don't just want to know who watched the show that was voice activated. We wanted to know, what the context was. Did they ask for it straight out? Was it the next thing on a menu? What's the context? And so YouView, today, without voice control, we're backcrawling 500 million data points a day as to how people find content, never mind what they're watching, because those journeys and discovery paths to content are becoming as important as viewing behavior itself. So, there's a richness of data that's there. These devices know who is in the room. They're going to know, by the way, if you are sad or angry. So when you say, find me something I might like to watch, they're going to take into account the fact you sound a bit sad.
I always sound angry when I'm speaking to Alexa, though, to be honest.
Yeah, and British irony, I'm waiting for them to kind of deal with that as well. So, but there's all sorts of interesting kind of opportunities, but the conversation, has to start with data and openness about that.
Yeah, I mean, Grace, this has to be something that you're scratching your head about a lot, that sort of data, because data is the oil that powers everybody's AI dreams. Everybody wants to, create good recommendations, content personalization, and it all comes from data.
Absolutely, and the truth is the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Googles, they are so far ahead of us, it's quite extraordinary. But we are trying to catch up, and we do have some advantages in our armory. We have the content, and therefore we have the content data, so we can be much more considered around the metadata tags we put into how people find things, how when you're sad, can the BBC give you the piece of delight that gives you the piece of content that's going to cheer you up? How can we add value there? We also need to be much more wise to audience data than we have been, and anyone that listens to the BBC radio through their Alexa skill, I hope you have signed in, because that is what's allowing us...
It keeps telling me to sign in,
Yeah.
but why?
Because we need
It
to
seems difficult. I mean, what makes it more? Why don't I just ask it for the station? Why do I have to enable the skill?
Well, you don't at the moment, because
No, I
we're not
know.
making it mandatory.
Ah.
We may do that in the future. Because if you do, then we can give you more recommendations. We can make your experience better.
She
And
hasn't told me
frankly,
that yet.
She hasn't. And frankly,
Right.
if we don't have that data, then we're not going to be able to compete on this content. So if you like the BBC and you want us to survive, sign in.
That told you.
Okay.
Right, there are clearly a lot of questions, raised even more by this conversation, perhaps, than we can ever hope to answer. But it does seem clear that audiences are beginning to trust voice technology more and more. But can you believe everything you hear? Have a listen to this.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. In today's headlines, a giant banana has devastated half of the United Kingdom's shopping centres, causing irrevocable damage to a Brexit deal. Meanwhile, smart speaker sales continue to soar.
Wait a minute, hang on, I never said that. I am the real Sophie Rayworth, and this is what I sound like when delivering the news. What you just heard was created by Jose Sotelo from Lyrebird AI, so please welcome him to the stage.
Jose, everybody. Welcome to you. Thank you so much for coming to see us and for making that. We would think it's quite hard, quite complicated to do that, but what's the process? How much of Sophie did you need in order to impersonate her?
Yeah, hello. So thank you for the invitation to be here. I come here from a company called Lyrebird, which I helped create. And in Lyrebird, we developed some algorithms that are able to copy the voice of anyone with only a few minutes of audio. The way it works is you record a certain set of sentences, let's say something like 30 sentences, and based on this, we're able to create what we call a digital copy of your voice.
Wow, so I could one day be replaced by a smart speaker, is that what you're telling me?
So it would not be as charming, but maybe in terms of the voice, yes.
Oh, bless you. Well, you can stay. Well, does it raise any ethical issues, though? Because you may have actually. Well, let's actually have a quick look at something which you may have seen. It went a bit viral fairly recently, or maybe a year ago. This is something that you did, wasn't it, with somebody? Some of you may recognise. Let's have a quick look.
They only need you to record 1 minute of audio. This is just the beginning, and they are working hard to improve their results. They want to use this technology to change the life of everyone that lost their voice to a disease by helping them recover this part of their identities. Let's help them achieve this goal.
So, Obama, did he approve that? How does he feel about that, first of all?
I'm not sure how he feels, but yeah, so definitely this raises really interesting ethical issues. In particular, what we worry about is that you see the technology to build these kind of fake videos, the technology to make them believable, the technology to build the fake voices behind that is mostly already built, it's mostly already developed. And so right now what we believe is the really big risk of this kind of technology is that people don't know about it. And so we want to be outside and we want to show this to people. We want to be here and let you know, guys, this kind of technology is here, realistic and not really identifiable fake video will be done most likely in the next year or in the next 2 years, something like that. And so how would you feel if you were going to see a video of your best friend saying some bad things about you? Or how would you feel if you were going to see a video of your wife or of your husband saying some bad things about you? And what I believe is the most important thing is that we start being reluctant and we start to be suspicious about the media that we consume. And this will have many different kind of implications later down the road.
I mean, it is early days for the technology, at the moment. It's really in its nascent stages, but we're already beginning to see, in cybersecurity, we talk about adversarial networks where you've got, and they've shown this with pictures, we've got computers that can generate humans that don't exist. And then you've got adversarial AIs that are trying to spot the fake humans and then telling the ones creating it, so, what's wrong with that? So we've got this kind of continually self-improving, using AI now, and presumably people are going to start being able to use that to improve and make it ever more seamless, this content.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of like the scary side of this technology, what we have seen. And we like to speak really openly about this because we believe it's really important to inform the public and to let you know that this kind of technology is here. There's also some potentially really cool applications, really kind of life-changing applications. Think about ALS, think about the disease that Stephen Hawking had. Like, what if at the moment that he got this disease, he could have kept access to his voice? Voice are such a personal part of identities, and it's easy to forget about how much they matter to us until we lose them.
We do a lot of content reversioning for different territories, different language territories on Click, and I know that you've prepared another quick clip for us, which is somebody's voice you may recognize speaking in a language you won't necessarily. Let's have a quick look.
Los Estados Unidos de América están 100% comprometidos a respetar el derecho de poseer bananas de todas dimensiones. Vamos a hacer las bananas grandes de nuevo.
So, President Trump there, speaking in Spanish. But this is, we had a bit of fun with that, and thank you very much for making those videos for us. But again, this is potentially for accessibility, and language accessibility is a really big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, imagine about the media that BBC broadcasts. Imagine the ability of making it available for everyone in the world in their own language. Think about maybe David Attenborough giving all the documentaries that he has given for basically the audience, in audiences all around the world.
Yeah.
We believe that this technology can also have like really life-changing applications and really cool things you can do with this.
Jose, absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your technology with us. Everybody, put your hands together for Jose.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, interesting stuff, right? I mean, it kind of takes this conversation to a whole new level when we think about, fake news, subversive messaging. A lot of our technology is internet connected, that we deliver broadcast, particularly radio. What happens in a world, Ben, where you get your radio broadcast interrupted by a voice that you think sounds familiar and has nothing to do with the broadcast?
Well, interestingly, the younger you are, the more suspicious you are of stuff you find online, which is perhaps helpful in some ways. And remember that it's only 30% of the British who say they can't distinguish fake news from real news, and that's one of the lower figures in the world. So there are some countries where most people say they can't tell what's real and what isn't. So the British, rightly or wrongly, think that they're reasonable judges of fake news. I think the interesting thing with AI generally, moving away from smart speakers per se, is that humanity is generally okay with a smart speaker. Where the problem comes is things like self-driving cars, but interestingly also your bank. So letting a computer algorithm decide what to do with your money, people aren't comfortable about that. And I think, that's so... But again, with all new technology, we're always concerned. Printing was meant to mean that we never remembered anything anymore. There was massive anxiety 500 years ago when that was invented. Bicycles were meant to lead to outbreaks of sexual licentiousness amongst the lower orders because they could cycle off now easily and meet people they shouldn't. So we're always worried about new technology. But at the moment, we're concerned about computers doing things without any human intervention. But let's wait and see. And privacy is a weird thing because we're worried about it, but only a tiny minority relatively do actually change anything about it.
Absolutely. I mean, Grace, do you think that there are risks inherent with iterations of technology that could impersonate, or are you kind of at the same feeling that it's just another obstacle on the minefield that we have to navigate?
I think it's absolutely something we have to be aware of, and I I posit the reason maybe the British are so good at testing fake news is because we have such a strong public service broadcasting culture that has educated them, and the power of our brands, the strength of our brands, like the BBC, has conditioned us in that way. So we have to protect that. We have to tell audiences, we have to tell young people about the risks, and we have to ruthlessly check our facts. And at the BBC, we'd rather be second and right than first and wrong. And I think that that's going to preserve the brand strength for the media companies that are prepared to do that. It's something we're going to have to navigate. It's not existential, probably, but it is something we need to be aware of, and I think is why brand is so important.
And when we are, Richard, we're beginning to see now, in fact on Click last year we tried to break a bank's voice recognition for, password recognition using identical twins, which we thought was quite cunning. But we didn't manage to do it. But could this technology, pose a risk for a broader security in terms of accessing your devices, accessing your content? What do you think?
I think it sharpens the mind on the kind of control points that we all need to establish with these companies. So I think the smart move is to kind of work with them as the technology evolves and iterates, because there's still these things are very crude, I think, compared to where we're going to see them in 2-3 years' time. So let's not stifle that innovation by jumping and closing down an ecosystem that's just getting interesting. But equally, let's think really hard about the control points that really matter. So, for example, in the context of television, we talk a lot about prominence and the ordering of linear channels. But in the context of voice, do we talk enough about brand attribution and the BBC getting credit for its radio services? Do we talk enough about data and making sure that Channel 4 knows as much about who's going to watch The Circle tonight as Amazon do? I would say there's some sort of first order questions around those control points that broadcasters and platforms need or should have, and we need to get aligned around what those are, and we need to ask for them, and we need to make that a kind of joined up partnership conversation with Amazon and Google that allows the technology to flourish. And I think it's that kind of mindset I'd really try and encourage, rather than seeing it as kind of something happening over here and we need to control how we've seen things historically in the UK.
I mean, talking of fake news and, sort of attitudinal changes, I think, of young people. Grace, we were having a chat about, you've got young kids and they interact with Alexa. Do you think that we are desensitizing ourselves? My father came to visit me recently and he was horrified by how abrupt I was with Alexa, not saying please and thank you. And I said to Alexa, do you care if I say please or thank you? She said, I do not know what you're talking about. Do you think that there is a worry about that?
I think it's how you behave in front of your children. I think we're role modelling. Parenting's not changed because we've got something in the corner of our kitchen that's slightly different. I parent in the same way if I wouldn't do. So I ask Alexa, please, even when I'm on my own.
I think there's an app that actually makes you say please, isn't there? So your children have to say please and
I'd
thank
love
you
that,
to the speaker.
What's the magic word? I mean, there's a question about cultural changes as well, right? I mean, if you are, when it comes to the intent of interacting with different platforms, who's in charge of the cultural kind of note and tone? And are there any nuances? Does it even matter?
Well, I think they are going to have to get better at spotting different accents and pronunciations, aren't they? And I assume the technology moves on a pace, but that is a major challenge. We're very keen to start having it ask you questions in the morning when you wake up, but we'll see how that catches on.
And there is just a thing as well about immediacy. The Fukushima nuclear meltdown was a great test point for voice, right? Because who's ever needed to know the word Fukushima, right? And all of a sudden, it's the biggest search term in the world, and that happened in seconds. So, from a technology standpoint, how do you get to the point where you're able to kind of understand sort of changing norms in language? So there's huge.
I think there's there's this general issue about the phone or the speaker becoming this or the cloud almost becoming this exo brain where you don't remember people's phone numbers anymore because they're in your they've stored it and we don't know yet because we're just in the infancy whether people really will just start to completely rely on this technology to remember things. And will that have effect in terms of how people make patterns and make connections if they really can start to find everything? But we're some way away.
Do you see it changing your children's relationship with content?
They do. It is absolutely shaping my children's relationship with content. we will know they don't understand linear broadcasting. You know, Amazon is the same to them as Netflix, as is iPlayer. This will be disruptive to them, and that's why we as public service broadcasters have to be in that ecosystem in order to shape their youth and therefore shape their future habits. But I actually see the opportunity when it comes to children. I really do. I think that it's a great device, as long as it's relatively controlled. I think that if we shape those experiences and crack the understanding issue, because you know, the 2-year-old it cannot understand, the 4-year-old's getting there, right? Yeah. But if we crack the understanding as that technology moves on, I think it's a massive opportunity.
Yeah. And the regulation of AI is, again, in its infancy. I mean, we're working for DeepMind on how your health data should be handled with people in the NHS. So DeepMind, in fairness to them, have got health service professionals and patients in the room to start talking about, well, what should happen if DeepMind has access to some of your data? Because we know that, you know, it can start, I mean, this can actually listen to stuff going on in your household and start correlating that with illness. All of this is in its infancy. I thought it was fascinating that Grace immediately talked about regulation as a broadcaster, showing that's the BBC. You know, right? But in general, the regulation is not keeping up with the technology in all of these areas, and that is is going to take a long time. People online, there are still people online who think you can say anything on Twitter and it's fine because it's not real. And that attitude is going to change.
And of course, GDPR, you know, people's own personal data rights changes that, you know, in a world where...
Don't worry, Brexit will be fine. We'll leave that.
No, but what about the right to be forgotten, right? The right to have things deleted. And if Alexa is recording and storing all of this stuff, where does that sit in the mix? I mean, there are a lot of regulatory issues that need to be ironed out, are there not, Richard?
Well, yeah, there are, and then there's lots of technology issues as well. So, you know, companies like Google and Amazon are trying to now wrestle with, where do you put AI technology? Does it live in the cloud or does it live on the device? Because it's actually quite useful to know the state of the device that you're using. That's more important than the huge, vast mind that you get by cloud computing in the sky. So there's big kind of technology choices that come with this. But I go back to my point earlier about the really simple control points. You know, things that we could probably all agree on are, you know, that parental controls at 3 in the afternoon should be different on this device than they should be at 9 o'clock at the night. So is that the watershed brought to voice? Potentially. Could that be backed by primary legislation? Definitely. You know, there are ways in which we can navigate through this so that the kind of core protections that we expect, taking it from a consumer standpoint, are put in place, albeit some of the protections that we might have for PSB and others are harder to achieve. So I think we just need to sort of keep using the technology, forgive it when it gets it wrong, and kind of learn as we go.
Perfect. Well, listen, I suspect we may have raised more questions than we've answered here today, but I hope it's given you some food for thought and maybe made you hear perhaps some opportunity and also be aware of some of the risks coming up. Sadly, that is all we have time for. I hope you enjoyed it, found it enlightening. Stick around. My boss is going to talk next, and I'm sure he's got lots more information that he's going to share with you about the future of the BBC. Thank you so much to my brilliant panellists for joining me today. Grace, Richard, Ben, thank you so much, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.